The laugh they fear, power hates laughter, not mockery light, not haha isn't politics silly, late night chuckles. I'm talking about the kind of laughter that doesn't ask permission. Because here's the uncomfortable truth, most political systems don't collapse from revolution. They collapse from embarrassment, not bullets, not ballots, but ridicule that makes authority look small. Satire doesn't storm the palace. It shrinks it. And once people stop seeing rulers as inevitable, the whole illusion starts leaking like a punctured myth. Satire is not comedy, it's a weapon. Let's clear the fog. Satire is not jokes about politics. Satire is power analysis with teeth. Comedy asks, isn't this funny? Satire asks, why do we tolerate this? It doesn't aim at laughter for relief. It aims at laughter for reframing reality. That's why authoritarian regimes ban it first. Not journalism, not philosophy, satire. Because satire doesn't argue, it reveals. You can debate a manifesto, you can spin a statistic, you cannot unsee a ruler turned into a clown once the mask slips. That image sticks. It lives rent-free in the public mind. And power hates unpaid tenants. Satire short-circuits obedience. Most systems of control rely on three quiet assumptions. Authority is serious, authority is competent, authority is inevitable. Satire detonates all three. When a leader becomes a punchline, something dangerous happens. People stop performing belief. They still obey, maybe, but the obedience becomes hollow. And hollow obedience collapses fast. This is why satire often precedes political shifts rather than follows them. The jokes come first, then the protests, then the rewrites. Laughter loosens the joints of ideology. History keeps trying to warn them. This isn't new. Humans have been dragging kings with jokes since before paper existed. In ancient Rome, satirists were exiled, jailed, or quietly removed. Not because they lied, but because they made power look ridiculous. In medieval courts, the jester was tolerated precisely because they spoke truths no one else could. The fool was allowed to say what the wise man would be killed for. Fast forward. Jonathan Swift didn't write a modest proposal because he thought eating babies was funny. He wrote it because polite moral language had failed. He used absurdity as a mirror, and the mirror was unforgiving. Charlie Chaplin mocked fascism with The Great Dictator, while the world was still afraid to say Hitler's name out loud. Not with tanks, with parody. And dictators noticed. Oh, they noticed. Why satire works when facts don't. Here's the brutal reality no one likes admitting. People do not change their beliefs because of facts. They change when their identity gets uncomfortable. Satire creates cognitive dissonance without announcing it. Memes are the new pamphlets. Let's stop pretending this is all highbrow. Modern satire lives in memes, clips, remixes, edits, duets, stitches, digital graffiti. A meme can flatten a carefully constructed ideology into a single image. No footnotes, no citations, just instant pattern recognition. That terrifies institutions built on slowness. Because power loves time. Satire loves speed. A policy speech takes weeks to craft, a meme dismantles it in seconds. And once the internet decides something is laughable, good luck restoring its dignity. Satire does not offer solutions, that's the point. Critics love saying satire doesn't build anything. Correct. Demolition comes first. Satire isn't architecture, it's a wrecking ball. Its job is not to replace power structures but to expose their absurdities so replacement becomes imaginable. Before satire, the system feels natural. After satire, it feels staged. And once something looks staged, people start asking who wrote the script. That's when paradigms wobble. The limits of satire, yes, there are some. Satire can fail. It fails when it punches down. It fails when it flatters the audience instead of challenging them. It fails when it becomes brand safe, algorithm neutered, or trapped in irony without intention. And worst of all, it fails when it becomes predictable. Power adapts. It tries to absorb satire, monetize it, turn it into harmless vibes. That's why real satire always feels slightly dangerous, slightly uncomfortable, a little too honest for polite company. If everyone agrees with it immediately, it's probably not satire, it's marketing. Why authorities always say it's just a joke. Notice the pattern. When satire lands too close to the bone, the response is always the same. It's not serious. Stop being dramatic. Why are you so offended? That's not dismissal, that's panic. Because satire exposes what power wants invisible. And ridicule is contagious. Once people start laughing together, fear loses its monopoly. Laughter is a political act. Satire doesn't tell people what to think. It shows them what they've been pretending not to see. It shifts paradigms not by proposing new systems, but by making the old ones feel unbearably fake. Every major political shift is preceded by a moment where the emperor stops looking clothed. And somewhere, usually, a satirist was the first to point and laugh. Not because they were unserious, but because they understood something power never does. You can rule through fear, you can rule through force, but once people laugh at you, you are already losing. Satire is cognitive warfare, the undeclared front. Satire isn't just cultural commentary, it's psychological interference. Modern politics is no longer about persuasion, it's about attention control. Who controls the frame controls the meaning. Who controls the tone controls the outcome. Satire attacks tone. It destabilizes the emotional register a political system relies on to function. If authority requires seriousness, satire injects farce. If nationalism requires reverence, satire introduces parody. If ideology requires certainty, satire plants doubt and lets it grow wild. This is why satire functions like cognitive warfare without uniforms or generals. It doesn't need consensus, it doesn't need permission, it just needs enough people to recognize the joke at the same time. That's how paradigms fracture, not top-down, but sideways. Satire versus propaganda, mirror images. Propaganda and satire look similar on the surface. Both simplify, both exaggerate, both use imagery, repetition, emotional hooks. The difference is direction. Propaganda closes interpretation. Satire opens it. Propaganda says, this is how things are. Satire says, isn't it strange that this is how things are? Propaganda demands belief. Satire invites recognition. That's why propaganda needs enforcement and saturation, while satire spreads organically. One requires power, the other undermines it. And when satire becomes widespread, propaganda starts to look desperate, louder, clumsier, more defensive. That's not coincidence. That's a paradigm under stress. Why satire ages better than policy? Policies expire. Satire fossilizes. Most political programs are forgotten within a decade. Satire survives because it captures structure, not circumstance. You don't need to know the full policy context to understand a tyrant slipping on a banana peel. That image still works centuries later because the pattern hasn't changed. This is why regimes fear being remembered as jokes more than being remembered as cruel. Cruelty can be justified. Ridicule can't. History forgives monsters faster than it forgives fools. Satire and class, who gets to laugh? Here's a part that often gets skipped. Satire isn't neutral. It has class dynamics baked in. Historically, satire emerges from those close enough to power to understand it, but excluded enough to resent it. Too far outside the system and you get silence. Too embedded and you get propaganda. Satire lives in the tension zone. That's why it flourishes among journalists, artists, comedians, and intellectual outsiders, people who see the machinery but aren't allowed to steer it. When satire spreads downward and outward, that's when paradigms really shift. Because laughter becomes shared across social lines. And shared laughter is shared understanding. When satire turns inward, the danger zone. There's a darker edge here. Satire doesn't only destabilize power, it can destabilize everything. When satire loses its target and becomes pure nihilism, it stops clearing space and starts hollowing meaning itself. This is the moment where nothing is serious, everything is ironic, commitment looks embarrassing, belief looks naive. At that point, satire no longer shifts paradigms, it freezes them. Power actually benefits from that version of satire, because disengagement is easier to manage than dissent. So the question isn't whether satire exists, it's what direction it points. Upward or everywhere. Satire is a test of democratic health. Here's a simple diagnostic. A healthy political system can tolerate being mocked. An unhealthy one cannot. Not because mockery is harmless, but because tolerance signals flexibility. The faster satire is punished, dismissed, or reframed as dangerous, the more brittle the system already is. Satire doesn't create fragility, it reveals it. Think of satire as political ultrasound. It doesn't cause the crack, it shows you where the bone is already weak. Why this matters now. Satire matters most when systems are overstretched, incoherent, and visibly hypocritical. Which is now. Economic anxiety, political theatre, collapsing trust, permanent crisis language, satire thrives in this environment because the contradictions are loud. People don't need satire to tell them what is wrong anymore. They need it to articulate why it feels fake. Satire gives shape to that instinct. And once people can name the feeling, once they can laugh at it together, the paradigm has already shifted. The only question left is what replaces it. Not left, not right, just real,